at the heart of this story is the struggle for political power, the throne. It is an ancient society, and the throne is not necessarily the kind of ceremonial position that modern monarchies tend to exercise. But it is in this story, I think you can see that it is making a case for absolute power, totalitarianism. And that is in line with what a lot of literature of the ancient world tends to do. So I would argue, and watch how I'm going to trace this, that ancient literature reinforces the traditions of political absolutism, absolute power. This story is in many ways an argument for a strong leader that goes unquestioned. He's always right, he's always better than everybody else. And so we should all just listen. Can anyone think of an example from this poem that makes that point? I've got a couple in mind, but I'd be curious what you can come up with. Specific examples from the text. Essence.
I guess considering this story, even after Duryodhana got his throne of reputation, he wasn't satisfied with the fact that he had to rule beside Yudhishthira. So he decided to take advantage of his gambling and basically have him gamble away. I mean, not that it was, of course, it was a choice because he's also an adult, but he kind of took advantage of that blind spot and he was like, hey, gamble with me, and he ended up losing everything. And it kind of just shows like you wanted total power. You already had your own throne. You don't need to take over this person. So you did it.
The dice game is a dramatic high point in this. The deviousness, and I would use the word even Machiavellianist approach of Duryodhana here is, I think, instructive. Does that justify him being a good leader or him being the rightful heir to the throne? He demonstrates in that. Duryodhana demonstrates a knowledge of human nature, and he is able to predict what will happen, even among somebody who is, arguably so much the better from everybody else. Yudhishthira is always held as, the firstborn son of the royal line. He is the rightful heir. He is the best among us. Everybody says he's Mr. Dharma. Everything about him is ideal. But even that, Duryodhana was able to exploit and trip him up. He outsmarted the best and the brightest. So that makes an argument that, well, maybe Duryodhana should be king. Because if you can do that, if you can make predictions on human behavior, you can control human behavior. Maybe he should be king. Anybody else? Yeah. He in the dice game scenario, in the scene where Yudhishthira basically gambles away everything because he is playing dice at the invitation of Duryodhana. And Duryodhana, basically, it's a scam. It's a setup.
I feel like everybody knew that Yudhishthira was gonna gamble. Like, it wasn't just him that knew that.
Yeah, but Duryodhana was able to use that knowledge to bring about a specific result.
So back to your other question, I feel like he has some traits of king and some traits he lacks. Like ethical traits he lacks. So he's willing to do anything by any means.
Yeah, the notion of ethics, I think, is important here. Very good. Does a king have to be ethical? Again, I would point you to Machiavelli, and a effective king, does he have to be a good guy? Yeah.
I mean, you don't like physically have to, but since you are a king, you have your people looking up to you, so you want to lead by example. I think that's an important trait to have.
Leading by example is good.
Yeah, I agree, because then that's when like people start rebelling. That's when overthrowing kings start to happen. I mean, people start like losing faith.
Yeah, people lose faith.
That trait does come in handy.
Well, we'll get to the people in a little bit, but let's just stick with Yudhishthira and Duryodhana. The gods themselves position divine authority as beyond the realm of ordinary man. Think about the example from the chapter of this poem that is the title, the Bhagavad Gita. In this, you have this fantastic scene where the two sides of the family are standing on opposing hills with a giant field in between, and they're about to go to war. And their greatest warrior, Arjuna, is having second thoughts all of a sudden. And he goes down into the middle of the field and he just sort of sits there. He goes, how can I kill members of my family? You know, who hasn't been there? And he gets into this long conversation with his cousin and friend, Krishna, about how he has to do this, how, you know, this is his role in life. But he can't really make it make sense. How can I go kill all these people I grew up with? And at the end, after this long argument back and forth and torturing himself about how to do this, the rationale, Krishna displays himself to be an avatar of, an example of, an incarnation of the god, who is it? Indra, I think. And that's the ultimate answer. There's this little scene, I won't read it right now, but where Indra reveals to himself, or is it Vishnu? Vishnu reveals himself to Arjuna in this vision of overwhelming power and enormity. Who are you to question it? The God doesn't answer beyond saying, I am a God. You have no capacity to understand my workings. and you have no right to even question them. As kings, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, Yudhishthira's family, or the other family, again, too many characters to get a handle on. We can come to that too. As kings and the royal family, they are almost gods. They are practically gods. In the end, essentially, Yudhishthira becomes a god. So doesn't that make their actions beyond question as well? Think also about portrayals of ordinary people. There aren't many. We don't get to meet terribly many, shopkeepers or farmers or, shepherds or just the regular folk out there in the countryside. We spend all of our time with these gods and heroes. Now, I'm not arguing that there should be more characters in this poem, but by only focusing on the aristocracy, the best of the best, everybody else is just referred to as the crowd. Think about scenes like early on the tournament, when we are sort of brought into the rough and tumble crowd, and it's really very vividly drawn. And it talks about the smells and the sights and everything of being in there as everybody's crowding around to go see these sporting events, essentially. And you get the feeling that you're at some great big tailgate party in the in the parking lot of MetLife Stadium or something. You're going to see an NFL game, and it's really fun, and it feels kind of like, yeah, rubbing elbows with everybody, and everybody is just the crowd. There are no individuals. Can somebody open that door? The experience of that, I think, is very telling, because the crowd is always spoken of as very fickle. When in the competition for the Princess Draupadi's hand in marriage, at one point the crowd is all for Arjuna, but then at another time they're cheering for somebody else and they're not sure. And it's never individualized, it's never specified, it's always just the crowd. And you get this sense of them unsure of, well, I don't know who to cheer for now. It's like when your favorite player gets traded to the other team and then comes back and plays against them. I don't know. The crowd is portrayed as fickle. The crowd is portrayed as kind of just, dumb, waiting to be led around and shown who to support. Is that an argument for democracy?
It kind of reminded me like around when we were talking about Genesis and people who have, around people who had power and they're the one with control. I think it's almost a similar story as Hammurabi, and people who have power are the ones who have the say, and anyone else is just, has to follow it. Yeah. And that's why the story is like almost focused on people who have power rather than the other people. It's like the same thing over again with Genesis. Yeah.
You're you're building your entire story out of the interactions of people with power. And everybody else is just, followers. And it's like, yeah, they're an afterthought. We don't have to worry about them, because when the people with power figure out, who's going to rule, the other people are just going to go along because they're supposed to. They have to. And think again about that position of Vishnu saying, you cannot question me, any derivation of that power down into the human kingly realm, which derives its power and authority from the gods. They're very conspicuous about making that connection. There's no challenging that. You challenge that king, well, that's challenging God, because, yeah. How do you make that leap? How do you start thinking, well, no, I can challenge? You can't. Because to challenge the king is to challenge God. And this poem, I would say, on one level, is endorsing that. And think again about what we have spoken to with stories like the Bible and, a number of these. They are put together and promoted and collected from a variety of sources, often, but assembled to tell a story that promotes a particular culture. And that culture is almost always safely established with the authorities at the top, the people who put it together. And they can weed out complicating little storylines that might challenge that as they go along. Ancient literature reinforces the traditions of political absolutism. The gods themselves insist that their authority is beyond question or even the understanding of those beneath them. Think also about the war itself. The war comes because of an aberration in the natural order. Yudhishthira is always portrayed as the rightful heir. It's only through some very human complications that pervert that straight line of succession from Pandu through Yudhishthira. The human element gets in and screws up everything. We tend to do that. The natural order would be firstborn son, firstborn son, firstborn son, as ordained by the gods themselves. So this war, which is cataclysmic because it is so widespread, so many people will die and suffer. This war is entirely because of human innovations into that natural order. We screw everything up. The war comes due to a variation in the line of succession. And as said earlier, fickle and motley crowd in scenes of the tournament and the courting of Draupadi. If I were, called upon to write an essay right now in this room about this, I take my little pen, write my name on the top of the paper, maybe a date, and then I would start out with the phrase, ancient literature reinforces the traditions of political absolutism, period. Okay, that's a good start, if I do say so myself. Ancient literature is very broad. We're dealing here with a single work of literature, so we can narrow that down a little. Narrowing down is progression. Progression gratifies your reader. We can see this in the Mahābhārata. I will get this pronunciation one day. It's not going to be today, but I will get it one day. We can see this in the Mahābhārata, the ancient Hindu text of warring families. where the line of succession is the driver of the plot and the incidents along the way all suggest the righteousness of a totalitarian government. And then, as I said, paragraph number 1. The fickle and motley crowd in scenes of the tournament and courting of Draupadi. You flip through to those scenes, you pick out a few quotations. I won't do that right now. You include them in there. Talk about how, the crowd is sort of all over the place, but they don't know who to support. They don't know what to think until shown. This shows that. My favorite phrase in writing a paragraph. Every quotation should be followed by the phrase, this shows that, comma. And then you describe what those lines mean. This shows that the text is suggesting that the crowd are a bunch of morons. Ordinary people cannot be trusted. Ordinary people don't have the intelligence to make up their own minds about things. They need guidance, strong leadership. This kind of leadership lends itself to totalitarian government. Next paragraph. The war comes due to a variation in the line of succession. And you talk about all the complications of the plot. You can pick out a quotation from somewhere in there, I'm sure, that demonstrates how all of this chaos comes about because it wasn't always Pandu and Yudhishthira as kings. The minute that got suggested to be vulnerable, that open to innovation, open to human monkeying around, open to human ambitions, well, that's when everything goes to hell. They were much better off with no power to alter their government at all. And paragraph 3, body paragraph 3, the gods themselves insist that their authority is beyond question or even the understanding of those beneath them. And there you go to Vishnu. I love the image of him just sort of opening his overcoat and flashing, exposing himself in all of his richness. Look at me! And using that moment to shut down the conversation and saying, who are you to question me? This, by the way, is a reenactment of the same basic story in the Hebrew Bible of the story of Job, who complains to God, why have you been so hard on me? What did I do to deserve all the bad things that have happened to my life? And God's answer is, where were you when I separated the oceans from the land? And never explains a thing. You don't get to question me. This shows that, comma. this text suggests that earthly leaders, worldly kings, as derivations of divine authority, are also beyond question of the general populace. Slap a concluding paragraph on there where you basically rephrase the introduction. That's an A. If you should ever have to write an essay for a class about ancient literature. I don't know where that would come up. But that is also a very shallow interpretation of this text. And if you were to read a poem that is 7 to 10 times the combined length of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you were to just summarize the whole thing in a single sentence about how this reinforces the traditions of political absolutism, period, and you wait for your little gold star, that would be a great disservice. That would be a shame for you to boil down the enormity of this work to that little fortune cookie. So, what I suggest, whenever you're reading anything and you come up with an idea that I think this is what this is about, and you boil it down to that little fortune cookie, flip that around. Come up with the opposite and see if you can argue that. Ancient literature undermines the traditions of political absolutism. Suggests that those bastards in power, no. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't deserve to be there. Can anyone think of an example from the text that makes that point? Yes?
I'll say the current king.
What's that?
I'll say the current king, the blind king. Because he's always questioning, he doesn't know what he's doing himself.
The blind king, he doesn't really know what he's doing by himself. He is, he has a lot of self-doubts. He's always sort of relying on fate. In every instance where, you know, he could step in and make a positive decision about what they're going to do, how to avoid catastrophe, which everybody sees coming. This war is coming out there, and everybody sort of knows that. But it's up to the leaders in power to perhaps try and avert it. In every instance, he's all like, well, what are you going to do? There's nothing I can do. You know, it's coming. I would talk to my son, but, you know, he's so headstrong, there's no reason. This guy is the Fredo of the Godfather series. He's too weak to make that kind of positive impact. And so the fact that he is king suggests that kings aren't perfect. They're not gods. They are very fallible human beings. Question?
No, I have another one. I was thinking maybe of the dice game, because how like he was like I believe he was like he wasn't forced to do it. I believe is that.
What's that?
He wasn't forced to he decided to be in the dice game.
He got invited in, and he said, "Sure."
He wasn't forced.
Yeah.
And the thing is, his risk is he loses everything, and reward. I'm not sure about the reward. But if you're risking everything, this kind of shows you a very poor judgment on what your decision making is. And not only that, he lost. He lost, and another thing, he did it again in losing his wife on top of that. That means he made the choice twice. He made it twice at the same time. He didn't lose. Not only he made a bad decision, he didn't learn his lesson.
Yeah. He just kept doubling down is the phrase. He's just, oh, well, I lost all my wealth. I lost all my power. I gambled away my brothers. You know, they're going to have something to say about that. And, oh, yeah, well, I lost my wife too, but you can get another one of those. You know, you've only got 4 brothers, but, you know, you can get another wife pretty easily. Yeah. Even, and think about the context there. He's not just another guy. This is the guy. This is the best of them. He is the most righteous leader. He is always associated with the perfection of Dharma. He always knows his duty. He always knows what he is supposed to do in a given situation. He always knows what should be done in a given situation. He is the most mature leader. And even he has this little weakness. The best of them fall. What are you going to do? The best and the brightest. Great book, History of the Drawing of the U.S. into the Vietnam War. David Halberstam. Great book. Sorry. Complete side note. Essence.
Just piggybacking off that, or actually playing devil's advocate to it, you were saying what was considered the opposite thing, the opposite, how do you say, like, argument. One could also argue that despite everything that Duryodhana did to try to get Yudhishthira off his throne, he still ended up, like you said, being the most pure, the only one to make it to heaven, the only one to, even though he chose to go back to his family and how, but the point is he was the only one to do these things, and then even then you still couldn't keep him from his throne. He ended up getting it back regardless. So one could argue that, like you said, it kind of undermines it because regardless of anything, the gods will always win. And that, if you look at it like that, like they'll always get the order that they want to happen, basically.
He was, and you know, Yudhishthira was the guy. He was always supposed to be the king. And in the end, he achieves that, and he achieves more. He goes off into a divine realm in the Himalayas. He walks off into the Himalayas, and it's a little dicey in the bad pun. It's a little iffy in the or to read in the excerpted form, but in the very end, he has achieved such a level of perfection that he wanders into the Himalayas as a kind of holy man, who then is immediately granted entry into the divine realm itself, and he is granted that in bodily form. And this is important because everybody else, all of his brothers and all the other great heroes who are, you know, in various ways less than he is, a little dumber, a little bit more brutal, a little bit more hot-headed, all of this, they all, you know, they're following along, but they're all going to have to go back through a couple of layers of reincarnation of physical bodies. The fact that he does that he can achieve that even after everything because the gods have willed it, almost makes you wonder. Now remember, if you have read this poem in its entirety, it's taken some time, and you have really put in an investment of effort to follow all the twists and turns and figure out all the characters and the behavior. And there are so many names to get and so many little incidents, so many little actions, and it's so overwhelming. Who was that? Thank God for footnotes, but you don't have enough space on the footnotes for everything that you're supposed to keep straight. But if in the end, it all ends up the way it was always going to be anyway, what's the point? The gods, as you said, ordain that this is the way it's going to be. And all the twists and turns and human complications along the way don't matter in the slightest. So, what is the point of revering this divine authority anyway, if you have absolutely no power to affect it? If it's operating on a level or a scale completely beyond you? Huh? And in those moments, we have to recognize that we're not better than these people. The text is doing that to us very subtly. It's reminding us that we are just as weak as all these characters in there. So it is casting a very wide net in condemning the kinds of authority and power that we might be used to. It's dragging down the heroes and the kings and saying their authority and power is not to be revered so much because they are all just awful human beings. And they're weak. But it is also along the way drawing you along to the conclusion that, well, the authority of reading, the authority of sitting in judgment of these people and saying, oh, well, that person is terrible. I would never gamble away my wife. I'm not sure anybody can get out of that unscathed. We're all drawn along. The principle at play here is attachment. Can somebody let him in? Thank you. Which we will see. Which we'll see pretty explicitly in when we get to ancient China as well. This philosophy of do what you're going to do, but don't be so married to the result. Do what you have to do, which is dharma, your duty, but understand that that exists only in the moment, and that any results from that you should just take, oh, okay, well, that's what comes. The problem with the scheming for power is that it is all focused on an exterior goal. I have to get the power. Everything I do along the way justifies that, but I have to get the power. And I'm getting more power along the way, but that's not enough because I have to get the most power. You are attached to that. And that becomes a kind of lust. That becomes a kind of burning ambition. And that emotional context is a warning. Every character that acts emotionally in this poem is somehow flawed for doing so, is portrayed as being a little irrational. Yudhishthira, you can make the argument, is in the middle of that dice game, not because he hopes to win, but just because each toss of the dice to him comes up as, oh, okay, there's another toss of the dice. Not thinking of the consequences. We can criticize him for that because for him the consequences are pretty bad. But he's just in the moment saying, oh, I lost. I lost. I lost. Think about the simplicity of that line that is repeated again and again and again. I lost. Each toss of the dice. I lost. It becomes kind of a knee-jerk thing. He doesn't say, but next time I'm going to win. He just, I lost. The conspicuousness of it draws attention to itself. There's no development. No, it should be, I lost the first one. And then you vary it a little bit. Writing today, somebody were trying to write this as a scene for maybe a Stephen King thing where it's building suspense, or a movie of some form. Every time you're going to see him get more sweating and be a montage of, leaning in more. Like, no! And at the end, he's just beaten down. You see this progression. That never happens. He's just, I lost. I lost. I lost. Because each one just sort of happens independently. He's not worried about a result. And that is the ideal. It's detachment from all worldly things. Because you're focused on the divine. You're focused on the ideal, as he always is. But again, bring that back. Is that a realistic attribute or a good attribute in a political leader? To have absolute power, but have no sense of consequences. So I come back to ancient literature undermines the traditions of political absolutism. It is, in fact, revolutionary in its own way. Even the best humans are fallible. Yudhishthira demonstrates this. The pettiness and rivalry that leads to the war is something we all share. It is common to all human beings. And so human beings will naturally have some bad days that lead to catastrophe. And should not be taken as everything that they say is right. And also, divine authority is inherently different than mortal authority, as shown in the dramatic revealing, again in the Bhagavad Gita. When Vishnu exposes himself, that is a godly answer to human squabbling, but it's not an answer. It's just reminding us of the difference between the divine realm and the human. That sharp dividing line between those two. And if we have already established that, kings are ultimately human beings. Authority figures on earth are human beings. They are not gods. And the rules cannot be applied to both. So, right now, I would hope you are all confused as all get out. I said on the one hand that ancient literature reinforces the traditions of political absolutism, and then I turned around and said ancient literature undermines the traditions of political absolutism. Well, what is it? Have I really been drinking that much? I say one thing and then I just completely contradict myself. I'm not that bright. What is the effect of this book, this poem, saying these two completely contradictory things? You don't know what to make of it. Is it one thing or is it the other? What? What is it? What's the effect? Essence.
I think it can be either or, just depending on how you interpret it. Like, there's no right or wrong. Like you said, these stories were written as abstract realities, so it's about which interpretation you take more of.
Okay.
I was thinking of both, and that it's supposed to point out what's going on and also criticize what's going on at the same time.
Okay. Anybody else? It can be either. It can be both. But that's still not talking about the effect. If something can be either one or the other, or it can be both, this and that, where does that leave you in terms of how is this supposed to help? What is the practical value of this? I just read this poem that is, damn long. Took me months of reading the whole thing. And in the end, what the hell's it saying? Why can't I boil it down to the fortune cookie? Why can't I? That would be so helpful if it would. In the end, just say don't, or just do it, or, I'm loving it. Something simple. When you're told two contradicting ideas, one is over there, one is over there, you're in the middle. You don't know where to go for guidance. And yeah, like Essence says, in certain circumstances, you might go a little further over this way and say, well, okay, this is it. We should respect authority. It makes society move better. We avoid large-scale catastrophe by just all playing our part. That's the social contract, after all. But other times, we go over here and say, well, yeah, but I don't want to give up my individual autonomy. I don't want to give up my right to judge people and understand that, well, all right, that king is bad. That king, and this does happen from time to time, is kind of a jackass. Is that it? Am I just supposed to follow blindly? I don't know. But you're pulled between these two extremes, and you're sitting there trying to reconcile them. You're trying to bring them together. You're trying to make sense of this and that. There is no answer. But there is that struggle. There is the experience of that struggle. There is the uncertainty of being suspended between the two knowns in a kind of uncertainty. Now, which state sounds more like life? Where you're absolutely certain about one thing, or you're absolutely certain about this other thing. Or you're just kind of in the middle, figuring it out as you go along. In the middle, stuck in the middle with you. Great song. That sense of suspension, that sense of vulnerability that comes from not really knowing. That is universal. For some, I would argue more than most. Think about the ancient world. If your average character in here were to pick up their iPhone and dial 911, who would respond? It's terrible wireless service in the ancient world. No one's going to respond. It's a dangerous world, especially if you go outside of the narrow constraints of your society. There's a reason that it's only been in the last couple hundred years that mass numbers, or even not even the last couple hundreds, mass numbers of people have started moving beyond the 3 square miles that they were born in their lifetime. Most people, they just sort of, all right, this is good. This is where I started out. I was born right over there, and look, there's a nice little spot of empty ground for when I die. But if you go outside that, it's dangerous. The uncertainty of figuring out a dangerous world that you don't understand at all, where you don't understand why every now and then when it's raining, there's a lot of noise. And where do those bolts of light come from? The world is scary. We can buck ourselves up with some scientific knowledge, but, that doesn't go very far. Look at a dog when there's thunder crashing. Yeah, that is the character of the average person in the ancient world. Struggling for some sense of safety and security in a world that makes absolutely no sense.